Morning, everyone. I just wanted to talk a little bit about my struggles with becoming a mum and how More Than a Mum actually started. Um, and a lot of it comes down to basically being in an identity crisis. So when I first became a mum, I really, really struggled. I found that my sense of self-worth was actually tied to my work and the skills and talents I used at work. And I found that these skills and talents were completely and utterly useless when it came to becoming and being a mum and learning how to do that. And so even though I returned to work, because I desperately craved adult interaction and being challenged and using those skills and talents, I found that I really didn't have the same passion and drive for what I did before I had my daughter. And something just felt off, like something was missing. And to add to all of that, I felt the overwhelming guilt of returning to work and not actually knowing whether that was the right thing to do for me, for my daughter, constantly second guessing the decisions I was making. But I also felt guilty for wanting to just be me again. And I couldn't consolidate that in my mind with the idea of now being responsible for this little girl. But there wasn't a day that went past after I returned to work, or even when I was planning to return to work, where I wouldn't stress over the decisions, where I wouldn't be triggered so easily to tears. I remember eating lunch on my own, thinking, this is great, I've got some freedom, and then all of a sudden I'd be in tears again. I'd be crying quietly to myself on my commute home from work and to work every day. And that became almost normal, which for me, I found hard to deal with that being my new normal. And even a beautiful sunny day at work and going out for a walk during my lunch break, I would miss my daughter terribly and think, oh, we could be, spending this time together. So I wasn't getting what I needed from returning to work. Even though in my heart of hearts I knew that it was ultimately the right decision. So returning to the working world for me was the way that my identity was challenged, and it doesn't necessarily take that to know that you no longer feel like the person you did before you became a mum. I often hear the mums say to me, I don't know who I am anymore. I don't know how I'm supposed to adjust to this role of being a mum but still feel like me. And quite simply, it comes down to one simple thing. Now, Dr. Alexandra Sachs is a widely recognised clinical psychologist who specialises in the developmental transition to motherhood. And she very aptly puts this in the words of, giving birth to a new identity is just as demanding as giving birth to a newborn child. It is so true. And yet we prepare ourselves for months, for years, even sometimes, for the birth of birthing a child and potentially what comes after. But we don't actually ever sit down and prepare ourselves or take the time after becoming a mum to evaluate what our life is like now, to evaluate who we are now. And this is the scary thing. Becoming a parent is such a huge transition, and not taking the time to fully adjust afterwards does lead to these identity crises, these states of, I don't know who I am, I don't know what I want, I don't know what's the best decision, I don't know how I can live as more than this role of being a mum. And so I quite often see, even with my own mum, women who go through years of not ever reconnecting with themselves and living a life of just being a mum. So More Than a Mum was born out of that, because I knew that my background in psychology was screaming at me internally, saying, this is not right. This is not the way to live. This is not the best way to be a mum and a woman. And so I went and found myself an answer. Now, all I can say to you today is that you need to give yourself the time to reflect. We quite often keep identifying ourselves with our past version of ourselves, so before we became mums, and that person definitely has changed. Maybe in little ways, maybe in big ways. But the point is if you don't sit down and work that out and reevaluate what you want from life now based on those changes, you may continue to go through life like I was for years as someone lost, as feeling constantly lost and second guessing yourself and not truly being happy. So that's my story, a little bit of my story. It's where it all began, and I hope to share some more with you soon. Thanks. Bye.